If you're a fan of oranges, mandarins, lemons, grapefruit, or any other thing in the citrus family, today's episode is definitely one you won't want to miss. This is Talk Ag to Me. Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, we're interviewing JP Beall from Old California Botanicals. Now, JP is a buddy of mine from the Farm Bureau. We actually met during a discussion meet contest we'll talk about in a future episode. But for today, we're going over all things citrus. We're talking about the citrus industry, some of the misconceptions, the issues, the technology, all the things that go into making sure that your oranges, mandarins, lemons end up on your plate and in your grocery stores where you like them. So if you're interested in the citrus industry, or if you are a grower yourself or consumer of citrus, please stick around and check out the episode. It's a lot of fun. And go check out JP on all of his platforms as well that we'll be talking about here in just a minute, too. If you do end up liking the episode, please make sure you do all the things you know to do. Like, comment, subscribe, share. You know all the fun stuff the YouTubers ask for all the time. If you do end up liking it, though, make sure you share it, as we always say, not just with your online family, but with your offline family as well. Around that dinner table, those conversations are important to have nowadays. But without further ado, we're going to hop straight into the episode. So if you are with us, we'll see you on the other side.
Hi, everyone. I'm JP Beall. My company is Old California Botanicals. I am the fifth generation of my family to grow citrus in Redlands, California, which is down in San Bernardino County, east of Los Angeles. My company makes products from the wonderful agricultural commodities that grow in my area. What we don't grow ourselves, we have the pleasure to work with things that farming families we've known for a very long time produce and have produced for a very long time. The ingredients are fresh and local. We make lip balms. We make a soap my great grandfather developed 100 years ago that uses local orange oil and orange peel in the ingredient. We make vintage reproduction perfumes as well. We even have a sourdough starter. And then, of course, we're very proud of our line of marmalades. These are made with fruit that I grow myself here in the Redlands area. Either we grow ourselves or, we can talk a little bit more about what it looks like to be a citrus farmer here, or at least for me. Um, but using our proprietary methods. And we work with another Heritage California company to produce, but we actually just won 8 medals in an international blind tasting in the UK at the World Marmalade Awards. It's the first year we entered. We're really excited. All of our submissions medaled twice. So our navel orange won a silver medal, which we're really thrilled about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really stoked.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, I was actually gonna bring that up if you didn't. So yeah, congratulations on your recent awards. That's awesome. I think that the citrus byproduct or kind of the products that typically come after your post-production products, that sort of thing, are kind of lesser talked about when it comes to grand scale citrus industry. So I'm excited to dive more into that. But just to give our audience a little bit of background into how we met, so JP and I are both members of the California Farm Bureau, and so we had the opportunity to meet during a discussion meet competition. And actually, if those of you who are listening are interested in hearing more about that, we're going to do a follow-up episode here before too long on discussion meet as a contest and talk about all the logistics that go into that. But essentially, during that contest, JP and I had the opportunity to meet and talk about some of the issues facing the agriculture industry, and we just kind of saw that we were on the same side of the coin in terms of discussing these issues and making sure the public's aware about them. So, JP does a lot of work with his own company and in the citrus industry in terms of educating the public on his social media platforms, and does a lot of what we're trying to do here for specifically citrus. And so we're going to do our best today to kind of give you guys a crash course into Citrus 101, talk about the industry, the issues, the misconceptions, kind of everything that surrounds the citrus industry specifically. And we may get off on some tangents because that does tend to happen, but I think it'll be a good conversation nonetheless. So what do you think, JP?
Absolutely. Well, tangents are the spice of life, but let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I do want to hear all about the marmalades and the products in just a minute. But before we get there, let's kind of give our audience an overview as to what the citrus industry looks like in California specifically.
For sure. Well, so just sort of starting from the top, and we'll just sort of paint a broad picture.
Mhm.
In terms of citrus production in the United States, there are really sort of two main states that anchor the industry. There's California and there's Florida. Of course, there's also citrus production in Arizona and in Texas and in a couple other places. In fact, actually, states like Georgia, and Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken, are incentivizing, subsidizing the planting of citrus in those states. Um, Now, drilling in specifically on California. California at the end of World War II had about 400,000 acres of citrus, and that was at its very peak, 1945. We have about 300,000 acres of citrus in California today. We've lost about a third of that acreage. Most of that loss occurred south of the Grapevine, in the way I would be speaking. So that would be the part of Southern California that is Los Angeles, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, San Diego, Imperial counties. There is still a great deal of citrus agriculture in this part of the country or in this part of the state. But, in talking and discussion meet, and actually, I think this was the round we were in, Brendan. The round was in, or the discussion meet competition was in Orange County. We were
Mhm.
sitting literally in a hotel that was developed on the side of an orange grove.
Yeah.
But the Orange County in particular has a really staggering statistic that it lost 85% of its prime farmland in just the last 40 years. That's
Wow.
it. It happened really quickly. Um, I recently was doing a some research for a St. Patrick's reel coming up on our Instagram, Old California Botanicals, if anyone's interested. And at by 1930 or 1932, Orange County was the United States' single largest Valencia orange growing location. It produced 1/6 of the country's Valencia orange stock single-handedly in the 1930s. There is today less than 200 acres of citrus in all of Orange County when there used to be over 100,000 acres. And in the city of Orange, this is an entire county named after an agriculture commodity class that basically barely exists in it anymore.
Yeah.
Think about that for a moment. And then the county
Yeah.
seat is named for this commodity. And this county seat, City of Orange, has but 2 acres left.
Wow. That's
That's
and
it.
it is it actually oranges, or do you know what the citrus is?
It
Is
is
Valencia's?
Valencia oranges.
Okay.
Yes. And so, in terms of the anatomy of what grows where, um, different types and different seasons, and these are things we talked about at the start here. So when you're close to the coast, you have less temperature
Hmm.
variability. In certain areas, you have sort of a higher salinity to the soil.
Hmm.
um, you have maybe a sandier sort of soil, but in certain river valleys like the Santa Ana River Valley, which city of Orange sits in, I sit in the upper end of the Santa Ana River Valley.
Hmm.
You have clayish soils that come in there. And of course, citrus farmers will argue about everything. You want to start a fight, you ask them whether citrus grows better in sandy or clay soils. And really, probably what's closer to the truth is certain types of citrus favor certain soils better than others.
That makes sense.
Um, Valencias, I think, in terms of the conventional wisdom up our way, tend to favor sandy soils. Lemons tend to favor sandy soils. And they tend not to be too tolerant of heavy temperature swings. And
Hmm.
so when you get closer to the coast, you see things like Valencias, you see things like lemons. And that's kind of why you see an awful lot of lemon agriculture going on up, say, in Ventura County.
Hmm.
But where you, Brendan, come from, where I come from, you're in the foothills of the mountains. You have the hot days, you have the cool nights, you have,
Yep.
some freeze risk. Some of these types of citrus have a minimum temperature tolerance that's fairly high, which is to say, if the temperature gets too low, the fruit can freeze. The tree doesn't do too well. So you see those varieties less commonly out where Brendan and I are from.
Hmm.
And you see other varieties do better here. And so a couple things happen there. The types of citrus that you think of as really, really robustly sweet. You get those really incredible flavor outcomes. And there are multiple ways that that can happen. You know, I'll preface this by saying you get lovely citrus from all over the state of California, but the warm days, the cool nights, these microclimates concentrate sugar, they concentrate color, they concentrate flavor, even nutrients, as it turns out. And our oranges are even oranger in these areas. Yeah, it sounds funny to say, but it's actually true. Um, and I don't know if anyone was following just one of these spice of life things. If anyone's been following the prohibited food dye conversation with
Hmm.
RFK,
Yeah.
one of those things was a citrus dye,
Oh.
um, which is used, I'm sorry to say, has been used on certain Florida oranges to make them look more orange because the climate in which they grow does not allow the orange to fully develop that color that everybody wants to see in the store. And so it's a petrochemical that goes on with like the wax when you're preparing it for commercial sale. And so, you know, unfortunately, California has this set this beauty standard in the citrus industry that you know that was unfortunately the reaction to.
So we're just that much better at growing really pretty oranges that Florida has to artificially make their oranges oranger to keep up.
Basically, yeah,
That's awesome. So yeah, I want to touch on a couple of things you talked about there.
yeah.
Obviously, I think one of the bigger pieces that a lot of people are going to capture is that, one of the largest citrus areas in California, Orange County, has minimal to no citrus now compared to what it used to have. And not to say that it's completely out of citrus, but it's no longer the citrus giant that it used to be. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and you kind of put your own thoughts into this, but I think that much of that is due heavily to urban development and to changes in consumer demand in terms of urban in terms of housing and in terms of there's a lot of factors that contribute, but I know that, like, for example, when they built Disneyland, that was a huge hit to that area, not just in terms of the agricultural area, but also the housing and urban development that surrounded Disneyland. And don't get me wrong, I love Disneyland, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to ignore the implications it had on agriculture in that area.
It's really funny you bring that up in particular because good friends of ours up here in Redlands were the family that sold their orange grove to Walt Disney to develop Disneyland, and they
Oh, wow.
moved up here after that. And there are a couple packing labels that come to mind, like the Shamrock label and the Caledonia packing label. For those of you guys out there who enjoy packing labels, which that's a whole other conversation there. Um, but those are packing labels that are associated literally with the land that Disneyland now sits on. Um, and it that was a turning point. Yes, after World War II, a couple things happened. Um, the GI Bill
Mhm.
happened, and so there was interest in housing the troops who had served our country so well in World War II. And there was a little bit of industrialization going on here in Southern California too, that supported that. We also had sort of a generational shift, and we also had some really bad weather. We
Mm.
had a couple freezes and some drought years. We actually had about a decade of drought, and within that period, we had a couple 10-year freezes, like all falling within 10 years.
Wow.
And so that none of them were, say, as bad as like the 1913 freeze, which, like, for those of you listening, that would have been basically like the Great Depression for citrus. That's like the freeze to end all freezes. Um, but you have all these things going on together that impact the output of your orange grove. All of a sudden, the value of your land is going up. The freight costs of getting your fruit to market are now going up because your freight costs had been held flat They had been under price controls during World War II and the Great Depression, and all of a sudden they're readjusting to market, and you have an economic boom happening. Everybody wants this freight capacity. So all of a sudden, it's much more expensive to get your fruit to market, which also shameless plug for California citrus farmers. We were shipping. We had priority shipping during World War II because we were sending our fruit to support the Allied war effort to ensure that our troops were not getting scurvy or any of these diseases when they were out there fighting.
Yeah,
Um, and so doing our patriotic cause. Um,
naturally.
naturally. Um, But all these things began to happen where, you have a revenue impact, your costs are going up, and there's demand for the land, and just there's a huge market interruption between 1945 and 1960, where you begin to see some of this acreage get eroded. And so, I think this is another thing that Brendan and I talked about. And, we're not necessarily here for an economic history lesson. But
That's a different
the
episode.
for sure. How much time do you have? Um, but the other aspect of sort of how the citrus industry is shaped, and this gets at your initial question, Brendan, is that ag processing plays a really important role in citrus and really in a lot of California's um, agricultural industries. And what do I mean by ag processing? So maybe you've heard of a term called a packing house. And so those packing houses do a couple things. So they bear responsibility for picking the fruit that from the grove owner. They will then wash the fruit to ensure that it's safe to eat. Um, that all of that. They will store it while it's waiting for sale. They will market the fruit to different places. They will ensure that it is shipped to different places. Um, there's a variety of different things that a packing house, plays a role in. And, there's sometimes it's a cooperative effort where growers own a packing house and this packing house serves these growers. Sometimes they're privately held. But all that is to say, and there's a sorting and grading process as well. So, you walk into Whole Foods and you expect to see, oranges of a certain size and color and beauty, and there's no nicks or faults on the peel. All of that happens at your packing house because you're getting all sorts of stuff when you pick an orange grove. And so certain things, because you don't want food to go to waste. And unfortunately, the reality is food goes to waste. That's an imperfection in our market. It was another reason why I founded my business. But um, some things go to a juice plant. And so you get to drink that in your orange juice. And this is really where Florida thrives. The majority of the country's orange juice comes from Florida because Valencia oranges are your traditional juicing orange. And as I said, they don't get as orange. So, um, that's, something in the grocery store you're not going to necessarily gravitate to. So you juice them instead. Anyway, but the packing house, the juicing plant, those things are all really important for the good function of the citrus industry. And the costs of running those things are the same, whether you've got 400,000 acres or you've got 4 acres. But the problem is they only make as much money as there is acres to support these businesses. And so when you start to chip away at the amount of farms that support these packing houses and these juice plants, you start to erode the ag processing capacity there as well. And so we're actually seeing this happen in California right now, not necessarily in citrus. I mean, we are there. I'm aware of one packing house that's actually going through Chapter 11. But we've been hearing about bankruptcies in the pear and now the peach markets for processing facilities. And these are some of the state's last. So it places fruit farmers in a really tough position, not having these resources here. And it places further strain. It's kind of a bad feedback loop. Because when you lose a processor, it hits the farmers, and when there's a hit to the farmers, you lose more processors. So a healthy market kind of requires a balance.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's almost one of those things, and I've kind of been exploring this idea for a little bit. Um, More often than not in the agriculture industry, like we like to say that there are certain things that are just generally bad for agriculture. And there are some that are, but I think generally speaking, almost any time there is something that negatively impacts one industry in agriculture, it benefits other industries in agriculture.
Yeah.
There's almost like a give and take. And even within the same industry, right? It's kind of like you were saying, there are certain factors that influence the productivity of certain, farmers in very specific industries, whether it be citrus or row crops or whatever it is. And those factors could be environmental, they could be economic, they could be based off of external factors like urbanization, or they could be entirely within the industry itself, like, people aren't supporting the packing houses enough, or vice versa. The farmers aren't getting enough support on their end, so they're not able to provide for those packing houses. And so there's a lot of different, factors that play into that. That almost not that that's necessarily a citrus misconception specifically, but that is an agricultural misconception. I think that even in the industry we fall into of everything impacts everything else in a slightly different way than we always view it. Like I'll give you an example. We had I'm sure you remember, was this 2023 or so? We had like historic floods. I mean, like ridiculous
Hmm.
floods in California, right?
Yeah.
Um, to the point where, like, my hometown of Tulare was so flooded that Tule Lake was starting to reform. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So in Tulare, that was like, biblical catastrophe. Like we had dairy cows that were swimming in their pens. It was so bad. Like we had a lot of, which is funny to laugh about now, but at the time it was
Yeah,
like we
those poor
weren't sure.
cows.
Yeah, we weren't sure how we are gonna make it out. Um, so I went down and interviewed some dairymen down there, and they're talking about how this was just detrimental to not just the dairy industry, but or not just the dairy industry in terms of the livestock itself, but also in terms of most dairymen in California, or at least in Tulare County, grow their own feed. It destroyed all their crop, right? Because even if the crop itself didn't necessarily get destroyed by the rain, the soil was so wet they couldn't drive equipment on it, or they couldn't harvest it, or they couldn't, it had such a ripple effect on the Tulare County dairy industry that it was, entirely detrimental for that year's crop. Meanwhile, up in Fresno, they were benefiting heavily from the amount of rain they got, and they didn't have the flooding problem because they had the infrastructure in place to handle it. And so it's just, one phenomenon in agriculture impacts so many different industries or even the same industry in so many different ways depending on those other variables.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a good point, Brendan. I think it's very easy to kind of fall into the trap of thinking that all of this is just here by chance. And we live in a world of instant gratification that, you
Hmm.
plant a tree, you get an orange.
Yeah.
Peck a button, get a pellet. And that's not really like there's an immense amount of investment and planning and time that goes into the point where you have your seedling orange tree to the point that you pick your very first orange. And
Mhm.
there's the water infrastructure necessary to get the water to that site. And again, that's a whole nother conversation. It takes 10 to 12 years for the average citrus tree, it depends upon variety and rootstock, but simply put, takes about 10 to 12 years for the average commercial orange tree to get to what's called peak production. It'll start to produce fruit in earlier than that. But generally speaking, the commercial output of the tree, that life begins around year 10. And depending on which farmer you're talking to, four farmers, five answers. Um, you'll say that maybe an orange tree has a commercial life of about 40 years. Some might say 80. I see trees here down our way that are 120 plus years. It will continue to produce fruit. You won't necessarily get the size. You may even see a decline in output, which is why ultimately we're talking about commercial lifespans at this point in time. Of course, the answer those farmers will give is that, well, the taste of the fruit is better. You talk about this with wines all the time. You have old vine wines that have special flavor properties. It's true, really, of any vine or tree. The metabolism improves as the tree ages, and so that's another thing that you encounter here in citrus country and in redlands. But yeah, so I mean, when you when you think about all the hands that touch that navel orange by the time it reaches the store, that orange is the achievement of 10 years of planning. And it is past, you know, there's the person who built the tractor, there's the pruner, there's the fertilizer, there's the person who's looking after the irrigation, there's the person who picked, there's the person who sorted, who packed, there's the person at the grocery store. There's, easily 8 or 10 steps in this process to get that orange to your table to enjoy at breakfast every morning.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's I think one of the larger components of the industry that I want the consumers to know more about, like we talk about I'm more in the ag literacy space than, the ag production space necessarily because, I'm a teacher and I do a lot of ag communications work. In that ag literacy space, one of the bigger questions we're always asking ourselves is how basically what's worth prioritizing? Is it more important that the people know the difference between a Valencia and a navel orange, or is it more important that they understand all of the steps that go into making sure that orange is on their shelf when they go to buy it?
Well, there's a funny story about that that I
Okay.
can tell. There's a story about friends of ours. I don't know. Did you ever hear about orange fights up your way in Tulare?
No, orange fights? No.
Well, I'll paint a picture. We used to have postcards here in Redlands that you could send to frozen relatives back east. I'll eat, throw a snowball for me. I'll eat an orange for you. So, kids being kids, bored out in an orange grove, you're throwing fruit at each other. And these friends of my parents' generation were having an orange fight, and one of them missed and hit a passing car.
Oh.
And yeah, and this person stopped, got out of the car, went up to the house. They lived across the street, and knocked at the door. One of the children's parents was having some friends over at the time, and so they were having snacks, I think, inside. She answered the door. The fellow was naturally upset, and the the mother was a very quick thinker, and the mother very calmly asked the man, "Well, can you tell me what kind of orange it was that hit your car? Was it a navel or a Valencia?" And the man kind of spluttered, surprised, and he's like, "It was a Valencia." And he's like, "Well, sir, I'm sorry, that couldn't possibly have been my boys. We only have navels here this season."
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Reasons to know. And I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about, this is something we got to at the beginning of the episode here. Theoretically, citrus grows and fruits in California year round.
Hmm.
But when we're speaking about different types of citrus, they're only available certain types of the year if they're
Hmm.
grown in California. So, the navel orange is kind of one of California's key commodities in the citrus industry. Those are being picked right now. I'm working on getting some groves picked here in the next couple weeks, our late navels. And of course, we favor late navels because that enables the warm day, cool night benefit from, all that sugar and all that.
Yeah.
So,
Tastes better.
oh yes. And, we'll also say same glycemic index as dates. Nobody ever really talks about that, but,
Oh,
runners favor dates for a good healthy snack. And turns out oranges have the same glycemic index as a date. Grapefruit actually has even a fraction of the glycemic index of dates.
wow. Good to
Um,
know.
yeah. So, but you think about lemons, you get multiple crops a year. You think about calamansies or calamondins, they're everbearing. Valencias, those are summer ripening. So you
Mm.
get them summer and fall. So theoretically, it is possible to build a calendar where you could be eating California citrus the entire year. But don't go to a roadside fruit stand in Ventura in August expecting to buy a California navel. You will be disappointed. I have seen it happen before.
That doesn't shock me. I know quite a few people and we were talking about this the other day too, about how a lot of people see, the citrus, like the orange wedge or the lemon wedge on their cup during the summer, and they assume that all citrus is summer. And in reality, I mean, like the citrus, it's like you said earlier, the citrus that's growing around my area, is mostly, it's navel oranges and it's mandarins and it's mostly fruit that's it's ripening in the winter. It's a lot of
Yeah.
colder fruit that need that good freeze to activate that sugar. And so it's more often the case if you're not from my area, a lot of people I talk to them about how we have citrus crops growing right now, and or we're getting closer to the end of our season over here, and they're like, they're confused, like, what do you mean you have citrus crops? Like we don't have citrus crops in the cold. I'm like, actually, our citrus crops need the cold.
Oh yeah. And it may confuse people, but that's why National Citrus Month is January, and that's why National Grapefruit Month is February. It's because of California and our citrus industry. Sorry, Florida, we love you, but
You
them's the
know, I
breaks.
I do want to get into another part of the conversation. I see that our call is getting ready to run out, so I'm gonna send you
Mhm.
another link here in just a minute. But
Sure, sure.
I do want to since you mentioned our uh, amicable rivalry with Florida that we have, I wanted to talk a little bit about a story from my citrus judging days, and actually, the kids that I coach now in citrus judging, some of the things that they say. But I'll do that in a minute when I have the time for it. Before we switch over calls here, though, we've talked a lot about kind of the overview of citrus, and we've talked about some of the misconceptions. I think there's a couple other things we're gonna get into. Is there anything you wanted to get in, any last minute comments in terms of foreign citrus? How we import from Mexico or how we export to other countries, or kind of what that looks like. I don't know if you have enough time for that in the next couple minutes we have.
Yes, I can at least begin to address that. It's kind of a large question. And maybe we'll start here. And so, in speaking of the impact of declining acreage on ag processing, what is an ag processor to do if it can't get fruit domestically to support its costs? Well, naturally, it has to start to look abroad. And the United States, for better or worse, our ag policy is basically 100 years old. The way our ag commodities are incentivized and supported, that system was designed more or less in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And in fact, the citrus industry almost became incentivized as a staple crop the same way wheat and corn and sugar got incentivized. And it happens that a Redlands man was on speaking terms with Franklin Roosevelt and was lobbying for this. But unfortunately, that bit of legislation missed the NRA bill, and so it got put into the very next bill. Well, no, the NARA bill, and it got put into the NRA bill, which got ruled unconstitutional, not necessarily for that piece of legislation, but for another thing entirely. And so the reaping that we have from that to this very day is that you have incentives for corn, for wheat, for the grain staples, for sugarcane, that sort of thing, but there is no incentive for citrus. And in fact, there's no incentive for roughly 98% of what grows in California. For all the hurdles California agriculture of any type has to encounter, it has persisted in spite of all of these forces, not with any support whatsoever. The only support we have necessarily is farmers markets. So for a citrus farmer, our one bit of support is the right to be able to sell oranges at local farmers markets in markets where people basically already have backyard citrus trees. Why do I mention incentives? Um, the one other set of, I wouldn't necessarily call them incentives, but protections that favored um, California commodities, and really these have been designed to favor different commodities across the country, is a set of protective tariffs. And this is something that has come into the conversation a lot recently. Um, and recently, for a lot of farmers, you've been seeing these protective tariffs disappear as trade deals have been struck with different countries. So, with citrus in particular, we've been seeing Argentine lemons and Brazilian oranges get placed on the market. Of course, Mexican citrus is coming here too. And the largest citrus companies like Limonera and Sunkist are global in nature, and they are designed to have both northern and southern hemisphere operations, so you can get that navel orange year round, because when it is summer here, it is winter in South America.
Right.
Um, so, there is that conversation, but these protective tariffs were designed to foster and support the domestic cultivation of these crops. And as these tariffs are disappearing, it is placing further strain on the cultivation of these crops here in the United States. Now, why does that matter? It's great to have year-round produce. Um, I personally am of the philosophy that it is best to give our fruit the longest amount of time on the tree possible. It's not how our grocery supply chain is designed, and that's not always possible. Buy local where you can, but it does have a nutritional impact, and that is proven. That's not to say that what you're buying at the grocery store is not nutritious, but the longer and the more ripe your fruit gets on the tree, at least for citrus, because it stops ripening once it is picked. There are certain types of fruit that continue to ripen after being picked. Citrus is not one of them. It's a non-climacteric fruit is the term for it. Anyway, the longer a piece of fruit or a vegetable or produce has to travel, the earlier it has to be picked, the more underripe it is picked. And because it gives it time to travel. And of course, typically the piece of fruit is harder when it is less ripe, and so it will bear the issues of travel. So, if that is important to you, having local supply matters to you. And the other side of this conversation is, we believe in the free market. We do. And so the elimination of tariffs is a good thing, right? Well, yes, but but um, our incentive structure here in the United States is not built the same way as it is built in the rest of the world. For those of us who follow wine grapes or who follow olives, the reason California olive oil has not taken off is because that is treated as a specialty crop. Meanwhile, you see Italian and Spanish and Greek olive oil in American grocery stores because all of those governments subsidize up to 50% of the revenues of
Wow.
those producers for export.
Huh.
Mexico subsidizes not only the water infrastructure development for citrus and for avocados, it also does top line subsidies for export of citrus and avocados. I believe the percentages are somewhere even in the 30% like ranges. You'd have to check for the exact percentages. And the list goes on. What we treat as specialty crops that are basically market rate here, the things we import because they are lower priced, they are lower priced because of direct government intervention from foreign governments. And those tariffs level the playing fields for domestic farmers operating at market rate to be able to compete with subsidized crops being dumped on the US market. Not to say it's not good. I love French, Spanish, Italian wine. I love Italian, Greek olive oil. There is a place for all of this on the American table. But I do know that California olive oil is a product of exceptional quality and that it deserves just as much a chance as Greek olive oil on the American table. Unfortunately, that's just not how we've shaped our markets here. The one final thing I'd say about foreign fruit is there's a pathological issue we need to get at. And so this is kind of the one final uh, issue of seeing our ag processing disappear. In my town alone, in Redlands, at the end of World War II, we had 35 packing houses alone. And there were places from all across the West that sent their produce here for sorting, picking, packing, marketing. In a world where the citrus psyllid is what it is, where you have medfly, where you have the oriental fruit fly, you have all these different insects, and we'll just say, for those of us who this is beginning to sound like alphabet soup to some. What is the citrus psyllid? What is HLB? What is citrus greening? So the citrus psyllid is an insect. It comes from the Far East, and this insect, also called HLB, Huang Long Bing, carries a disease called citrus greening disease. There is no cure for this disease. This disease impacts citrus trees. It doesn't impact people. But this disease, once it is introduced to the tree, kills the tree. The fruit is no longer edible. The fruit will not ripen. The tree dies, and it is contagious, and it can impact tens of thousands of trees if possible. And I think we've seen the news of the state coming in and destroying something like 30,000 pieces of root stock in North San Diego
Wow.
County, just in the last couple of months because
Wow.
they spotted an infected tree down that way.
Jeez.
And this was a tree nursery, and I think there was a question as to whether or not the insect was infected. I mean, this is a big deal.
Mhm.
Um, and we see these insect introductions occurring more and more frequently, for a couple reasons. So, we are fortunate to live in an age where we can access products from all over the world easier than ever before. And I I love ordering things online, and I offer a business that does much the same thing. These logistics channels do transport insects and invasive species. Look no further than say the zebra mussel, or to invasive species of fish. This has been long understood. And unfortunately, the transporting of fruit that has not been correctly cleaned, or the transporting of trees and specimens that haven't necessarily been treated by licensed nurseries that have kept them in clean and sanitary conditions, to areas from infected areas to non-infected areas have caused the spread of the disease. And unfortunately, you know, it's part of the California lifestyle, right? We all have our backyard citrus tree. We're not all as vigilant as we should be from time to time on the insect abatement thing. And I promise you, it is so easy to do. Um, what we do with our backyard citrus is there's a root drench you buy at Home Depot. The bottle costs less than $20. You mix it with water, you pour it in. I'm going to the drip line, so it's basically the part of the ground that's underneath the canopy of the tree. So as far as the limbs spread of the tree underneath those limbs is what's called the drip line. It's where the roots sit for the tree, and that proactively, that it's basically like a vaccination for your tree, but that only
Mm.
lasts something like 6 weeks to like a quarter. I forget. You'd have to read the label on the bottle, but
Mm.
um, it really is very simple to prevent the spread of the psyllid and other invasive pests. This drench impacts other pests as well, but the second an infected psyllid hits your tree and infects the tree, it's game over. There is no cure. Your tree is dead. It has to be dug up. And you have unwittingly also participated in the spread of the disease. And that the insect doesn't care whether it's in a backyard or it's in an orange grove. Um, And unfortunately, what this is causing is the spread of quarantine zones. And so, rounding back to my point, um, the only places you can really get washed, commercially cleaned, washed fruit is from a packing house. So it's really important that we preserve this infrastructure as a state, as an industry, as a country, as we encounter these issues of invasive pests, of uncurable diseases. We need to be vigilant in combating the disease in every way we can. There is great study going on at UCR in how to combat it. It has really hit Florida hard. So what it really does mean is that California's citrus industry is kind of coming to the fore until a cure is found. For the sake of Florida, they've had terrible weather with the hurricanes, both the winds and the torrential rains, as well as the impact of HLB has really decimated things there. I mean, they're holding their own out there. Don't get me wrong, but in order to ensure that the United States has a domestic supply for the longer run, California really does need to think deep about what it can do differently to protect and foster the citrus industry that, has kind of, sort of taken a back burner since World War II. There's a lot of different factors for that. We need to protect our packing houses, we need to protect our groves, and we need to find ways to be proactive about invasive pests.
Yeah. For sure. And I wanted to highlight something that you said there for especially for our people who maybe don't have as much of the agricultural background or maybe aren't, in production agriculture, but maybe they do have backyard citrus or they know someone that
Mhm.
does. The importance of this is it's more than just, a tree dying, right? Like as I think as you were talking there, you're talking about how this disease instantly, not instantly, but it's a death sentence for your tree, right? Um,
Yes,
it's something that I think your average consumer or somebody who maybe isn't involved in citrus may look at that and go, okay, well, a tree dies, so what? Well, the problem with that is not only is it highly contagious, so it's going to spread rapidly and cause issues for other trees, but also even if it were just, killing the tree, that even if it were just killing the one tree, it'd still be an issue because remind me, it takes 11 to 12 years for citrus trees to become productive or
exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah,
if we have, a grove of citrus trees that even if 25% of those trees go down, that farmer can't just go straight back into production next year, right? They it's going to take time for them to get trees they're able to produce again in their operation, They could replant, but they'd have to replant older trees or have, some kind of pipeline to those trees or have other options for, replacing that loss of production now. Which on the consumer side of things impacts, you guys because that means you have less citrus available or that your citrus becomes more expensive or that there are less varieties available. Like there are long-term impacts here that are more than just, okay, the farmers are going to have to deal with, having less trees now. It's like, no, all of us suffer if that happens.
absolutely. That's such a good point, Brendan. And I think I'd add basically it's almost like a wildfire,
Mm.
but for citrus, which 2 points there. Fun fact, citrus trees don't burn.
Oh,
And
really?
so, oh
I didn't
yes,
know that.
they're fire resistant. And so, there people are having a hard time with insurance right now here in California. And
Yeah.
certain insurance companies have been paying attention to where citrus groves are in their brush mapping and in their fire mapping, and taking that into account in doing fire insurance
Wow.
for properties next door. And so you do see some new orange groves planted in Orange County, and they're being planted up in the hills as a buffer between planned development and natural chaparral
Mhm.
as a fire buffer. And some areas have been doing that with vineyards as well, because weed abatement's part of the practice for
Yeah.
agriculture anyway. But the other thing I think would also be to point to carbon. So yes, like that's a 10-year impact if you offline these trees, not only for food, it has a carbon impact too.
Mm,
So if you think of a wildfire for a second there, California's had a couple really terrible ones these last couple of years. And so you lose the acreage, and if you go to replant, and I'm going to shape this like the Huanglong Bing story, because I mean, in actual fact, you're also sending all that carbon up into the air, but that doesn't count in this case. But you have to go to replant, right? And so it takes between 10 and 20 years for those new trees to reach peak carbon sequestration capacity. Actually, it turns out with sequoias and redwoods, it's much longer even than that. Of course, they have a longer lifespan and an immense capacity. Um, Citrus and avocado groves play an incredible carbon capture role, and it's not being talked about. So my day job, I come from a citrus growing family, but I work in renewable energy. I've had to do carbon math for synthetic ways of capturing carbon, the solar and wind farms, where farmers are going and doing this, apparently out of the goodness of their own hearts for free. We talk about a solar farm in terms of acres of trees planted. But here we have real acres of trees planted. They're broadleaf and evergreen, which is basically what you want for carbon sequestration. And because they're planted more densely than natural forest as well, acre for acre, um, a grove of citrus or of avocado captures 85% as much carbon as an acre of Amazon rainforest, and more than
wow.
2.5 times the amount of carbon as an acre of natural US forest.
Wow.
If you care about carbon sequestration, we should be putting more citrus and avocados in, not
Mm,
taking them out. And so, that's an additional thing that you lose if you're having to rip all these trees out, is you lose the carbon capture as well. And, that is an additional thing when you have a baby tree growing up to full size again, that takes a decade.
yeah, that's insane. I didn't realize it was that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I knew that citrus trees were good for carbon sequestration. I didn't realize how much more impactful they were than, like the natural infrastructure we have for that same process. Wow, that's really impressive. I wrote that one down because that's one definitely gonna be using because we have a lot of conversations down here in the valley about, those exact conversations, environmental impact and how agriculture can be better at, being stewards of the land and all those sorts of things. When in reality, a lot of the practices we're doing are already kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Oh, yeah. And it's not a new thing. We've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really cool. We have about 20 minutes left of this call. There are a couple other things I want to hit on. If we feel the need to go
Mhm.
into one more, we can.
Yeah.
But we'll just kind of see where we're at in terms of time there. So we hit on pretty much all the big industry topics that I had written down in my notes for us to touch on. If there's anything else that comes up, we can definitely hit that. I know that you wanted to know more about the citrus judging contest itself and
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit. So we can hit that.
Mhm.
And then I do have a couple other questions about like, your marmalade business and that sort of thing as we round out the episode.
For sure.
Okay. So I told kind of hinted at it earlier, but I have a story about the citrus judging contest I was going to tell. So you, remind me, you said you were not an FFA growing up. You didn't have that experience. Okay.
No. Yeah.
Okay, so in FFA, we have these teams called CDEs, career development events, and
Mhm.
so they are, all kinds of different teams, but they're basically all founded in some type of industry, and the purpose of them is to develop career skills in students for that specific industry. So we have horse judging, we have livestock judging, we have meat science evaluation, we have veterinary science, we've got ag mechanics welding, we have, just general agricultural mechanics, we have water quality. Like there's almost every industry in agriculture has a subsection of a contest. And so citrus judging is that for the citrus industry. So it teaches students the basics of how to identify certain issues that could be plaguing a citrus tree. So identifying katydid damage or identifying red scale or earwig damage or insect damage specifically is kind of one of the bigger parts of it, but also how to identify specific issues with fruit itself. So like in check, or if you see puffiness, if there's creases, if there's chimeras, that sort of thing.
Mm,
So that's a big part of it is the defect identification. The other part of it is like the name suggests, they are judging citrus, right? And so when they walk into the contest, they're judging four different varieties of citrus. So navel oranges, mandarins, lemons, and grapefruit. And then they have a class of nursery trees they're judging as well.
mm,
And so essentially at the contest level, they have 8 rotations. So one of those is ID. Five of them are those classes, and then they'll have two additional rotations of one of the fruit. So like they might have like two classes of oranges or two classes of lemons or two classes of mandarins or something like that. And in addition to having to evaluate the fruit, they also have to give reasonings as to their evaluation. So if they walk into the navel orange room, for example, and they like plate three the best over plate one, over plate two, over plate four, they would go into the judges room and say, for today's class of navel oranges, I placed this class three, one, two, four. And in placing three at the top of my class today, I found that it was the truest of type, freest of blemishes, it had the least amount of damage on it, and they have to give their reasons as to why. They also have to evaluate cut sections, and so they have to identify, the tightness of cores, the evenness of segments, the thickness of the rag, all those sorts of traits as well. In lemons, they have to identify number of seeds, that sort of thing. And the idea behind that is that they're supposed to be kind of prepping themselves for quality assurance or like kind of to become a quality grader of sorts in citrus specifically.
mm,
Um, to the effect that if they were to be a citrus grower or work in a citrus packing house or work in any kind of capacity with table fruit, they would be able to identify which citrus would be more ideal for the consumers to be buying. And it's funny because we talk about it, and they all of kids join the team, or even when I was on the team, I had friends that would join it, and there's always this concern surrounding, well, I don't, I didn't grow up on a farm, I'm not really sure how I'm gonna be able to learn how to do this. The best part about the citrus contest, in my opinion, I think it's one of the easiest contests for them to join because it's one of the least complex. A lot of other contests have a lot of moving parts. The nicest thing about citrus is you judge it as if you were buying it in the store, right? Because as a grower, you're trying to look at this from the consumer's perspective. You're not trying to say, what would I eat? Because, the growers know that the ugly fruit still tastes as good as the non-ugly fruit. But the consumer is more likely to go towards, like you were saying earlier, the more cosmetically pleasing fruit, the one that has the less scarring, the less, blemishes, the brighter orange color. And so we talk about those things with reasons. They'll place a class and they'll say, I placed, three above four because three had more of that consumer eye appeal. It's more of a vibrant orange color. It's freer of blemishes. It's more attractive to someone who may be trying to purchase it. Like those are actual terms we use in the contest because that's what the intention is behind the contest itself, is training students how to identify those things. So anyway, so my funny story, the one I'm trying to get at is I have so many of these CDEs have national contests, right? We have national livestock judging, we have national, floriculture, we've got national vet science. All these contests have national. Um, Citrus only has a state level contest, understandably. And the reason why is because there are only 2 states in the entire country that have citrus contests, us and Florida. And so I used to, my students, whenever we have our citrus contest, we're always prepping and everything, and they're like, "All right, we're gonna win state, we're gonna go to national, and we're gonna win national." And I keep having to break it to them, like, guys, there's no national contest. There are no other states that do this. And they said, well, like, why can't we get other states to start contests? I said, because no other states grow citrus. And so it opens up this conversation around, what certain states grow because as California kids we assume that every state grows what we grow here, right? When that's really the case.
yeah.
So we had this conversation, and I told them, yeah, it's only Florida and us guys. They said, okay, well then we're gonna start a national contest with Florida, and it's just gonna be California versus Florida in citrus judging. And I was like, you guys go for it. That sounds great. Let's do that.
Let's go. I'm there. And that's a wonderful skill for students to be learning. And I wonder if the listener's head is quite spinning yet to be thinking that so much thought goes into the production of something that is sort of a split second purchase at the store.
Yeah.
There's so much effort that goes into producing a quality product for the American consumer, and an incredible amount of effort and skill. And the California citrus farmer has got it refined down to a fine skill set. You don't necessarily have to start life as a farmer. I didn't necessarily start with my family's acreage. I didn't actually even really. I got bit by the ag bug later. I didn't have an FFA program at my school. So I mean, for those of you who are thinking about, gee, maybe this sounds interesting, don't be intimidated. If you're interested, find ways to start to learn. Like I really, that's why Young Farmers and Ranchers and the Farm Bureau really was such a wonderful thing for me. So I would encourage you to find your county's program first and foremost, or if you're still in high school, find FFA, see if there's one near you. But it is possible to learn these things, but just be aware of the fact that money doesn't grow on trees. Oranges do, but it's not as simple as just growing on trees.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's a good analogy. Just because it grows on a tree doesn't mean it's easy to access for everybody, you know. No, I absolutely agree. I heavily one of the things I wanted to get to with this conversation is kind of like what you're just talking about, in that so much thought, so much effort goes into the marketing, the planning, the packaging, the processing, everything that goes into making sure that these citrus products, whether it be, fresh table oranges or orange juice or, or like the marmalade products you produce, everything has so much consideration for the consumer's benefit. I know
Right.
we've only got about 10-ish minutes left here of our time before we need to hop into another one. I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about your marmalade business a little bit more.
Sure.
But I also wanted to tack on to that a question. So you kind of briefly talked about earlier how some of the less cosmetically appealing fruit is kind of what you're able to pull into those products that are not going to be, like the table oranges. They're going to be in the marmalades or the orange juices or that sort of thing. I'm sure you're familiar with the Ugly Fruit Company.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything? Well, I'll kind of let you take the reins on. Like basically, what impact or what's your philosophy with using some of those uglier fruits for your product? Can you kind of give us a synopsis of your marmalade product? Like, just kind of give us a rundown on all of
Well,
that.
um, I think I'll start with sort of a yes and.
Okay.
The principle at work is yes, we are able in theory to use ugly fruit, and sometimes that's sort of where you see in products ugly fruit go. And I've looked at some numbers on the citrus market, and I think as far as California citrus is concerned, roughly 80% of California citrus crop on average gets picked, which leaves about 20% of it to fall to the ground, which
Wow.
breaks people's hearts,
Mhm.
and it does mine too. Um, you know, Take heart that at least goes back into the soil, it fertilizes the tree, it revisits us again in a future crop. Um, do not eat windfall oranges, guys, please. I'm telling you this as a friend. People do this. Do not do this. Micropunctures, introductions of bacteria, it's just not safe, guys. So, um, but, you know, ugly fruit, it's what's on the inside that counts. And the the thing about my region is we are one of those really, really special California microclimates. A former citrus capital. We used to have 60,000 acres in the Redlands area. We have 2,200 now. And actually, our city in its comprehensive plan zones for zero in the next 13 years. It is forcibly rezoned acreage for warehouses and for housing uses, whether the farmer actually intends to do that or not. But it does actually prevent the farmer from being able to capture incentives, and it prevents that land from being placed on ag maps and overlays that will preserve that land. It also does prevent young farmers like Brendan and I from being able to buy that land because it's no longer zoned a farm, it's zoned a warehouse. And so I'm no longer bidding against someone's cousin to buy the orange grove. I'm bidding against cousin Joe or cousin Jeff Bezos over at Amazon. Um, and so the value of that property changes. And so you're having a dislocation of young farmers who no longer can access property. And so I work with property that I own and trees that I own. What I don't own, I also work with on a consulting and a management basis with other farmers and growers. Sometimes I am brokering these small growers fruit. As the case is, commercial properties typically are at least 5 acres, and you have smaller properties that still have fantastic fruit that aren't getting served by the commercial market. And so I do that. And so we're not necessarily even just talking about ugly fruit anymore. We're talking about first-rate fruit that a citrus judge would smile at and lick their lips, and it would otherwise fall to the ground unpicked year after year after year. And that did, give me a sinking feeling in my
Yeah.
stomach. And um, we have such remarkable soil. We are on state maps for having prime farmland. We still have quite a bit of it around Redlands. We have exceptional mountain mineral water. It is a sustainable water source. In fact, actually, Big Bear Lake was built for the benefit of Redlands farmers. It was at the time the world's largest man-made lake in 1911 when we extended the dam. Um, and so, the water system is sustainable. It is non-potable water. So we're not using drinking water. We're going to debunk this fact for once and for all. Drinking water is a finite resource, guys. Yes, we agree. We do not water our groves with drinking water. Your backyard citrus tree, unfortunately, yes, that is getting watered with drinking water because that's what comes out of your sprinklers because cities make more money when they sell you drinking water.
Hmm.
Sad but true. Um, and unfortunately, also, there's additives in that drinking water that's maybe not actually healthy for your trees. If you've noticed that you've got your tree in your lawn and the leaves are yellow, A, it's overwatered, which is why it's yellow. And B, if there's chlorine or chloride compounds in there, which, it's healthy for us, it's not healthy for the tree, causes your leaves to yellow. Anyway, so um, I find ways to build acreage in other ways because I cannot own a large acreage yet myself. I'm working on it. But so I work with, misfits as well as prime fruit. And it started as a thought experiment, but we've been really pleased by the results because we think the results really do speak for themselves. You give the trees the best chance. You pay attention to what it is you're feeding, to how you're pruning them, our care techniques, the timing of when we pick, and the methods by which we produce our marmalades. You don't necessarily get a sort of flat sugary flavor like you might in certain types of mass-produced jams. You actually get a really, really it's you get the flavor of the fruit forward, and you actually get layers of flavor notes, which is the really surprising and lovely thing. So like we just produced mellow gold grapefruit for the first time here. We just got the shipment here yesterday, and it starts with the flavor of blackberry, and all of that is naturally occurring from the grapefruit.
Hmm.
And
That's
we're
cool.
really excited about that. You let the tree do what it's supposed to, and lo and behold, it'll take care of you.
Wow. That's very cool. We have about 5 minutes left. Do you feel like you have more you want to throw in there? We open up another one, or are you
Um, let's keep the conversation going.
okay? Sweet. Well, yeah, I'll add my comments here, and then we'll open up one more, and then we'll start to round things out after you finish up your points there.
Okay.
Um, But yeah, cool. Well, as far as you mentioned that the natural elements to your product there. I think that's really cool. How I want to dip a little bit into the awards you guys just won and everything. How has your marmalade business, I talked about it a little bit just now, but how has it evolved over time and to the point where you're now, winning awards for it? What is kind of your, not, asking you to necessarily share your recipe, but like what are some of the things that you guys are doing that's making you outstand, be so outstanding in your field, you know?
Well, I mean, we were honored, first of all, to have been recognized, and we're thrilled that people are happy with it. Um, this is our second season producing these marmalades in particular, and OCB is entering its fifth year here.
Mm,
So we started with four flavors, and those are the ones that we submitted last year to the World Marmalade Awards. We submitted our Navel Orange, we submitted Midiola Tangelo, we submitted a Eureka Lemon, and we submitted our Valencia Orange.
mm.
And we submitted them in two categories each, both in sort of the general fruit categories that they belong to, as well as to what they call the savory category, which is, I mean, I encounter a lot of people who are maybe not necessarily certain what marmalade is yet. People who think I've come up with a really great idea of putting the peel in jam. And while I wish I could take credit for it, I really can't. That belongs to a Scottish woman from Aberdeen back in the 18th century. I do not meet that description myself. But the and really actually it was developed by accident. It's a fascinating story. But um the savory category, for use on like a charcuterie board or as like a glaze for fish or for meat or for vegetables. We've had people make orange chicken with our marmalade, for instance. So that was the second category we submitted each of those to. And in each submission we made, we received a medal. And the way it worked is it was a blind tasting. Over 3,400 jars were submitted to this competition from 33 countries to this town called Penrith in the northwest UK, very close to the Scottish border. This competition's been going on something like 25 years now. And the panel of tasters include luxury food bloggers from Irish luxury hotels to the head food buyer for Fortnum and Mason in London, and actually a citrus grower for the Heritage Grove for Seville, Spain,
Oh, wow.
which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, what I find really is exciting is it's an opportunity to sort of compare notes against citrus that grows from literally around the world. You have
Yeah.
entries from New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, Japan, South Africa, from Morocco, Italy, France, Spain. Um, just to name a few, there were a couple of American entrants, and I think to my knowledge, I was one of three-ish. I don't have the exact number, but three-ish that received medals. Um, I am aware of an entrant from Hawaii that made an orange pineapple marmalade that had an inclusion of seawater in it.
Huh.
So I mean, they really did get quite creative. It's amazing what some of these were.
Yeah.
But so all tasted blind without the label. So we're really gratified because I mean the philosophy behind our marmalades was really to focus on the flavor of the fruit. And
Mm,
we're pleased that even in the making of the marmalade, we use a heritage process and a heritage recipe. And the focus is just really to try to elevate as much as possible and give people the premium process that we know that California citrus is capable of in every way. That,
yeah.
California grows some of the world's best citrus, and we want to show people just how that looks.
Okay, so I learned a lot from everything you just said. One of the things I learned was that Aberdeen is famous for a lot of reasons. So I don't know if you knew this, but the Angus breed of beef cattle comes from Aberdeen.
Oh, how about
Um,
that?
yeah, so their full name is Aberdeen Angus. So yeah, all your pure your pure Angus, your pure black Angus steaks, those are all thanks to Aberdeen as well. So um,
California Ag has a lot to thank Scotland for, it turns out.
Yes, yes, they do. But yeah, no, it sounds that's really cool. All of the different, like you mentioned, hearing about how citrus works around the world is just such an interesting concept. I know that in California we like to kind of toot our own horn for being the best at everything, but there's so much to learn from other countries in a variety of capacities. And I'm sure that being specific to the marmalade industry, you have a lot to learn just in terms of that, that craft in and of itself. But
Mm.
one of the things that always amazes me is how agricultural innovations in other countries are doing things that we, are more than able to do, just haven't quite gotten there yet. So it's really cool to see.
Absolutely. Actually, I think I'd add the amazing thing about California ag is our diversity, the
Mm,
sheer amount of things that we grow here, and the sheer amount of things the United States would be left bereft of if
yeah.
California no longer produced them is a very, very long list. But a lot of that is the consequence of that diversity coming to California over the course of a very long period of time. And so, I mean, that is, I think, kind of one of the last sort of mental images I love to myth bust with people is, people imagine the American farmer as just sort of this old white guy in a pair of bib overalls standing in a cornfield, which is kind of an unfair mental image anyway. But especially here in California, where our rice, well, a lot of this began with the Spanish. The California agricultural tradition borrows from indigenous practices that have gone on for thousands of years. It borrows from Spanish practices that are as old as the United States itself.
Yeah.
California being settled first by the Spanish in 1769. And, the citrus industry basically is as old as that Spanish settlement. And in Southern California, that is where it began. We are the cradle of that for the entire state. It would be a shame for there one day to be no citrus in Southern California.
Yeah.
But you look at the successive waves of Basque from southern France and northern Spain, who had an impact on cheese and on sheep herding and on winemaking. You have a look at the Sicilians, who brought us the major standard varieties of lemons that you see in the grocery stores today. You have the Azorean Portuguese. I know Tulare, where you're
Mm,
from, has an Azorean population or a
yes.
Portuguese, yes, as does Redlands. And
Yeah.
down in San Pedro, they've had a huge impact on fishing. They've had an impact on wine, on fruit culture. And it's the same group of people from Portugal, from Brazil, and from the Azores that
Hmm.
gave everything we associate Hawaii, with being quintessentially Hawaiian, from the ukulele to sugarcane to the pineapple to chocolate and coffee. That came to Hawaii because of those Portuguese. And our Portuguese just made a wrong turn. And we benefited. The
Yeah.
Japanese brought us strawberries. They really dug in on our rice industry. Nursery plants. There are nurseries here in California that have been family owned for generations that survived World War II, Manzanar,
Wow.
history. Involved in almonds or almonds. I'm sorry, guys up north. I'm a humble Southern Californian at the end of the day. Um, but and farmers I see every day, we have probably about 20 young farmers I deal with every day who are both men and women who are of all different ethnic backgrounds, who are Latinos and Latinas, who are of Asian backgrounds, of indigenous backgrounds. And, a lot of the people who farm here in our area today aren't necessarily the same people who owned the land and developed it first in the beginning. There are a few, but they
Yeah.
are actually the descendants of farm laborers who, through honing their craft and thrift, came to, in their own lifetime, own their own commercial acreage. And it's a tradition that their family carry on today. These people have stories of their first family members arriving with notes pinned to their vest because they didn't even speak a word of English when they arrived in our area. And so I would encourage folks to think a little differently about what your mental image is of a farmer here in California and just across the country. Because, if you knew the people I know here. I have the privilege to know here. That's just really not what American agriculture looks like.
Yeah.
And we've
No.
all been the beneficiaries of that globalism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you were talking there, I was just thinking about how I would really love to do an episode or even like a mini series on the various cultures that built California agriculture. Because like you said, I mean, like in my home of Tulare, our population is hefty majority Azorean Portuguese. There's some mainland Portuguese, a lot of Mexican, and a lot of Dutch. Like that's kind of our main
Oh
composition
yeah,
is.
we
Yeah.
left the Dutch out. I
Well,
forgot
yep,
them.
the Dutch are a big part, especially in my area. Yeah, a lot of Dutch, yeah, a lot of Portuguese, a lot of Mexican, and so those three cultures have kind of built Tulare for what it is. But I know that the rest of California is just as diverse in its agricultural roots. So it'd be kind of cool to do a whole series on just that, on how agriculture was developed by the different cultures that came here. So maybe that's something we'll do in the
Absolutely,
future. But
that'd be fun.
um, yeah, for sure. But no, I appreciate you taking the time to to talk to us today. There's a million and more conversations we could go down, and you and I are both talkers, and we have a lot of research and experience and knowledge to bring to the table. So I very much doubt this will be the last time we have any kind of conversation or episodes that we're doing together. But speaking of which, I hinted at it earlier, but we are planning on doing another episode relatively soon on Discussion Meet, um,
Okay, yeah.
talking about, the Farm Bureau a little bit and also the way that we met in the first place, that Discussion Meet contest, the value of that contest, and kind of what that does for young farmers and ranchers and everything. But in addition to that, we'll look forward to getting more into doing more episodes of these types. A little bit of peeling back the curtain. This is the first episode of this podcast I've recorded in over a year, and so you're kind of my step back into the the saddle kind of thing. So have some pride in that. That's kind of a big accomplishment. But no, I appreciate you taking the time to come out here and talk to us about what you do and your history and your background and everything that you're doing. That's just awesome.
Well, thanks for having me on, Brendan. I had a blast. I learned a ton, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah. Do you want to remind everybody where they can find you?
Absolutely. So, if you're interested in learning more about my business, what I grow, what my products are, what I do, my website is www.oldcaliforniabotanicals.com. And if you'd love to come and follow along, we have an Instagram and a TikTok where we do short form content on topics like this and on some horticultural topics as well. We have a Five Trees Every Californian Should Know series that has far surpassed Five Trees. We're on probably our fourth season now, is coming up here soon. But our handles here on TikTok and on Instagram are at Old California Botanicals. And so we'd love it if you come and join our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be posting the links to all that in the description of this episode, so that way they can find that easier. But yeah, we'll be doing some collaborative content over on his side of things as well. Some of the clips from this
Yep.
episode will be over there, so you guys can go check him out. I do have some homework for our audience. So I learned a new word today. That being correct me if I say this wrong. Non-climacteric. Is that the word you
Yes.
said? The term
Mhm.
for when fruit don't ripen after you pick them? Yeah.
That's right.
So I challenge everyone in the audience to find a way to incorporate non-climacteric into your vocabulary at some point this week. So find an excuse to bring that up in conversation. Um,
It's it's a great safe word if you're looking to get out of an awkward conversation at a cocktail party. I'll tell you that.
Oh, I love that. That's great. But yeah, we learned a lot today. I know that I learned a lot. Hopefully, our audience learned a lot. Like I said, I'm sure there's more that we could talk about in terms of everything citrus, and maybe we'll do a follow up. Now that we've done Citrus 101, maybe we'll do a Citrus 102. But I very much enjoyed our conversation today. So thank you again for that.
Likewise,
Um,
Brendan.
yeah, that being said, like I said, go check out all of JP's stuff. All that will be down in the description below. Check out more of my stuff as it's starting to come out. We're gonna start getting back into the habit of posting again, so hopefully that'll be more regular. But yeah, this was a fun conversation. So hopefully you all enjoyed. We'll catch you guys next time in the next episode on Discussion Meet. And if you ate today, thank a farmer.
Thank you, Farmer. Thanks, everyone.
And there you have it. There's your Citrus 101 for you. Big thanks again to JP for joining me for this episode. Please make sure you check out all of his links and everything down in the description below. I'll post all that down there so you guys can go see his awesome account that he posts all of his content on. You can also go order his marmalade products if you're interested in that sort of thing, or just check out more of JP as he comes along here. Like I said, he will be coming back on for another episode here pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that. But hopefully, we can continue to get more of these episodes out continuously from here on out. My goal is to get back into the habit of recording over the next couple of months, but things are crazy and schedules are difficult to align sometimes. So we're going to see how that goes. But I'll let you guys know what the plan is as we go along here. I also plan on keeping more advancements episodes rolling out, so make sure you keep an eye out for those as well if you're enjoying that series additionally. But yeah, that's all we have for today's episode. So thank you all so much for watching. Make sure once again you go through and like, comment, subscribe, share, do all the things you know to do, and go share it with your online and offline family, as we always say in here. But that is all I have for you. We hope to catch you in the next one. And if you ate today, thank a farmer.